Okay, in this video we'll be simplifying square roots of negative numbers. But prior to getting into that, we'll look at a review problem, like say the square root of 24. With the square root of 24, when you simplified it, you would take the 24 and break it into two numbers. One number that is a perfect square, so 4 times 6. Then the procedure was to separate the two numbers, give them each its own radical. Square root of 4 times the square root of 6. Now we can simplify. The square root of 4 was 2, and the square root of 6 we can't simplify it, so we left it alone. So the square root of 24 simplifies to 2 radical 6, or 2 times the square root of 6. If we also combine this with some of the simpler ones, like just the square root of 36. Obviously the square root of 36 is just 6. Technically it's plus or minus 6, but for right now we're just working with the principal square roots. So now if we put these two things together, if I look at a problem like this, let's just say the square root of negative 36. So we're beginning to look at what the whole video was about. Square root of negative 36, I'm going to do the same thing I did with the 24, breaking it into two parts. That's the square root of 36 times negative 1. Break it up. Square root of 36 times the square root of negative 1. So again, I've separated into two parts where one number is a perfect square and the other number isn't. Square root of 36 is 6. Now, the square root of negative 1. This is what's called the imaginary unit, or the square root of negative 1 has a value of I. So I is said to be equal to the square root of negative 1. So what this allows us to do is simplify negative square roots. So we'll do a different one. Say if it was just the square root of negative 25. Same situation. That's the square root 25 times negative 1. Break it apart. Square root of 25 times the square root of negative 1. Square root 25, 5. The square root of negative 1, there's the I. So now let's take it to the next level. If I took now the square root of negative 24. So we're putting all of this together. So like the previous problem in the very beginning, square root of negative 24, I'm going to break it up into perfect squares and non-perfect squares. So that's first. I'll first do this. That's 24. 24 times negative 1. But that 24, the same thing as 4 times 6 times negative 1. So I did an extra step here. So when I separate all three of them, that gives me the square root of 4 times the square root of 6 times the square root of negative 1. Square root of 4, 2. Square root of 6 stays the square root of 6, and the square root of negative 1 is the I. So all I'm going to do now is just kind of rearrange it. 2i times the square root of 6. 2i radical 6. I'll do one more example. Let's take the square root of negative 52. Okay, square root of negative 52. I'm going to do the same thing. I'll do 52 times negative 1. Same thing happens with the 52 from a previous lesson, how to separate 52 into a perfect square and a non. So I'm going to do the strategy that you should have seen or may have seen previously, how to simplify radicals. If I took the 52 and do old school Prime factorization, a little factor tree. 52, I know 2 goes into that. 26 times. So 2 times 26 is 52. Break up the 26. That's 2 times 13. So that means 2 times 2 times 13 is the 52. And there's the 2 times 2, which is 4, which is a perfect square. So 4 times 13. So, with that being said, 52 is the same thing as 4 times 13 times -1. Square root of 4 times the square root of 13 times the square root of -1. So that leaves us with 2 times the square root of 13 times I. Final answer, 2i times the square root of 13. Okay, if you have any questions, just post it in the comments.